Good evening to all. I hereby call this August the 9th meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. Due to the Safe at Home order, all committee members are participating virtually, as you can see. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there is a vote, it will be necessary to take what's called a roll call vote. A committee member will be recognized and will raise their hand and state their vote. The committee members that are present today, we have everybody in full house. We have Councilmember Jordan Larson. We have Councilmember Kevin Mundy. We have Councilmember Barbara Haynes-Burke and myself. So thank you all for being here today. Before we move to the consent agenda, as always, I'd like to take a little space and give honor to the brave men and women of the police, fire, and emergency management departments, and just thank them for the work that they do every single day to protect and serve this city. We certainly appreciate all that you do, and I know I speak on behalf of the committee. Now we move to the consent agenda. For those who aren't aware, items on the consent agenda are typically approved with one sweeping motion, unless a member of this council or committee pulls an item for discussion or consideration. Members of the committee or council, are there any items we should pull for consent for consideration? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, could we pull C5 simply because I have some questions?
Item C5, Councilmember Monday, is there a motion to approve the balance?
So moved.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded. We will go down the roll call. Councilman Larson?
Yes.
Councilman Mundy?
Aye.
Councilwoman Burke?
Yes.
That is a yes for me. So the consent agenda, with the exception of item C5, is approved. Now we'll move to item C5. If the clerk would please call the item.
Item C5, ordinance amending section 42-97 of the city code relating to weight limitations on through traffic on certain city streets.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councilman Mundy is recognized.
Thank you. The question is, I'm looking at the map, and I don't see that Kent or Old Town Club, I guess that would be our already existing no through trucks zone, and those streets are so similar to Arbor. I wonder why that is, or exactly what the criteria is that would make these streets a no through truck zone.
I see our DOT director, McCullough, on the call. And if I could maybe recognize her to try to get Mr. Mundy an answer. And if we can't get it, we'll provide him with the information, of course. But Director McCullough, you have the floor, ma'am.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I do believe that there's already a truck prohibition on those roads, but I can verify that for you and get that information to you tomorrow.
Okay, and one of the reasons I asked Director McCullough is if Kent and I'm not sure it's called Old Town when it splits there, but the two streets that intersect, given that Old Town is a one-way out, the proposed extension, really trucks have nowhere to go. So, I mean, it makes perfect sense that that would be a no truck zone because they couldn't go any further than Old Town Club Road, and then all they could do was turn and go back out to Coliseum. So,
right, yes, sir. But I do believe that there's already a truck prohibition there, but I will confirm that for you.
Okay, and it doesn't affect my vote one way or the other. I was just curious.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course, Mr. Mundy, council action is required, so I'm going to ask that you make a motion. Now, when you get the information back, are you sufficient to move forward if you make the motion to the next council meeting to approve this item?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, you have the floor for a motion, sir.
Okay, I would make a motion that we approve item C5, the ordinance amending section 4297 of the city code.
There's a second. Seconded by Councilmember Burke. We'll go to the roll call vote. Councilman Larson.
Yes.
Councilman Mundy.
Aye.
Councilwoman Burke.
Yes.
That is a yes from me. So the complete consent agenda has now been approved with the addition of item C5. Now we'll move to item G1. Madam Clerk, if you please call the item.
Item G1, update on 911 calls for service data information.
I'd like to recognize Ms. Meredith Martin, who will give us a little bit of information on the item.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. Good evening, Chair Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the committee and council. As shared in the past, the city of Winston-Salem is one of 7 cities participating in a cohort to determine how to best respond to mental health calls received by the police department. Scott Tesh, the Director of Performance and Accountability, the Police Department, and I are working closely with RTI on the project. Tonight, Dr. Jake Kramer, a research public health analyst from RTI, is joining us to discuss the current state of the project. Dr. Kramer has worked with Mr. Brian Agard previously, who Mr. Agard has presented to us previously. And just to give you a little bit of background on Dr. Kramer, he's formerly led the analysis division of the Tucson Police Department. He has more than 9 years experience implementing and conducting research and evaluation projects and has led multiple national and international studies on effective approaches to policing. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Kramer.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for allowing me opportunity here to share this with you. I won't take very long running through this, and I'm open. I won't be concerned or offended if you want to interrupt me with questions, or we could save them till after, whatever you prefer. But I appreciate the introduction, Meredith, and just a thank you to Meredith and Scott and the police department for working with us. My name is Jake Kramer, and I'm joining you from RTI. Now, I've been with RTI for about 8 months. I'm approaching a time I can no longer say that I'm new. But prior to that, I was the analysis administrator in Tucson Police, and I'm still out here in Tucson, Arizona right now. Given COVID, I haven't been out to visit North Carolina quite yet, but I hope to soon. RTI International is in the Research Triangle Park area, right between Raleigh and Durham. So in this project, there's 7 cities, 6 of them in North Carolina, 1 of them in South. And really the goal here is to work with police departments and explore calls for service, but identify, are there alternative responses that can lead to more effective, more positive results for the community and for the police department. So I'm just going to walk you through this and then just sort of give you an update on where we stand with the project, and then I'm happy to field any questions.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So there's multiple phases in this project. And the first one, and I think one of the most important, is really understanding the context. It should come as no surprise, calls for service and how police are responding to calls in the community is a very hot topic right now. It's a very important topic nationally. And there's a lot of folks engaged in this research, but there's no such thing as a cookie cutter approach or as a one size fits all approach. So what is true across all 7 cities in this cohort, and something that's true in Winston-Salem, is we're trying to understand the context of your community, of your police department, to understand where might there be promising approaches or alternative responses that would be effective for your community. So to do that, we engage in an analysis of the calls for service data, that is the calls that police are responding to, and we did some focus groups with officers. Concurrent with that, phase 2 did a scan of the literature to understand what are promising approaches or practices across the country or even internationally where police have implemented an alternative response to responding to a call for service, and they've had successful results. So one of the reasons this project is so important is there's relatively a dearth of literature or of research on what really works as far as alternative responses. There's a lot of bright ideas, but many of them haven't been tested in a way that you might be confident implementing something new in your own department. So this research actually is helping us build that foundation of knowledge to understand what works and what doesn't. Phase 3 and where we are now really is sort of exploring now what pilots might we implement in Winston-Salem or Winston-Salem PD to understand where these alternative responses can be most effectively implemented. And an inventory of resources in the Winston-Salem community. Thanks, Meredith. So we can go to the next slide. So as part of this phase 1, understanding the context, one thing that we did was took all of the calls for service, or more broadly referred to as events, that the police department has responded to. And there is one typo in this, I apologize, but it was too late by the time the presentation was on the agenda for me to change it. So in about 3 years, the Winston-Salem Police Department responded to almost 578,000 events. So an event is something that a police officer responds to. 187,000 of those, so about 1/3 of those, it was police initiated. So what that means is a police officer is driving down the street and they see something, they decide to initiate the event. The remaining 2/3, about 390,000, are calls for service. Those are calls that came in through the 911 center and were dispatched to the police. So trying to understand really what's the universe of activity that police are responding to. The single most common category is traffic-related issues, whether that's collisions or traffic enforcement, suspicious activity, and property-related calls. Now, what may be unsurprising is these categories are somewhat broad and in turn somewhat unhelpful in understanding exactly what's going on. But that's where the pilots come in. So as we continue to move forward, we'll do a deeper dive into these categories to really understand the nuances of these somewhat generic categories. The other piece to try and understand the context was we had several focus groups with members of the Winston-Salem Police Department to try and add some contextual information to how the police officers are feeling responding to, in particular, mental health related calls. So the focus of this project is related to alternative responses for mental health. And so unsurprisingly, most of the officers advocated for an expansion of training related to how to handle mental health calls. And we're actually advocates also of co-responder models. That's something that we'll talk more about. But essentially an acknowledgement, we've seen some police departments almost an aversion to including co-responders or alternative responses. That wasn't the case in Winston-Salem. I think there's a lot of openness to that, which is really promising for this project. So moving into I want to run through a few of the alternative response strategies or ideas, just to give you a sense of what is out there. And like I said, there's no one size fits all approach. There's really no cookie cutter. There's no opportunity to take what's working in Denver or in Detroit and take it over to Winston-Salem, because there's so many things that are unique to a given community. So identifying what are the tenets or what are the underlying assumptions of these approaches, and then tailoring them to each jurisdiction. And in doing this, we can ensure that we're responsive to the needs of the community, to the needs of the police department, or the needs of mayor and council, and implement it in a way that doesn't have, I suppose, otherwise detrimental or unintended consequences with the police department or the community. So summarizing alternative response approaches, again, there's quite a few of these around the country and around the world. These are some of the more prominent ones. Some of these you may have heard of, and each of them offer, if not a wholesale opportunity to implement something, at least a lot of positive or promising ideas on components that could be implemented within Winston-Salem. So the CAHOOTS model, for example, is a community-based public safety system that provides first response for individuals in crisis related to mental health, homelessness, and addiction. So it's really trying to pair members of the community with those mental health professionals that are most trained to handle mental health crises. The home team approach, that's focused on EMS, and what it's looking at is high frequency users. And instead of continually this sort of pattern of engaging and responding to high frequency users, the folks that are calling 911 a lot, it's proactively reaching out to those folks to try and engage them with longer term mental health treatment. The CAMP model is focused on high risk individuals, again, linking them to mental health services. The lead program preventing criminalization of those behavioral mental health problems. And then something that overlaps with a lot of this, crisis intervention teams or crisis intervention trainings. It's a 40-hour course developed by the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And it's tailored to providing officers in particular with additional training on mental health responses to ensure that if they're the ones that are responding, and often they are, that they have some additional tools in their tool belt, so to speak, on how to respond to that individual effectively. So all of these, I guess, these fit more broadly in a co-responder model. And these are some pilots, some ideas that we talked about with Winston-Salem as promising to consider implementing. So a co-responder model in basic terms pairs a police officer with a civilian, and that civilian is going to be a social worker, a mental health professional, somebody whose full-time job it is to engage with individuals in a mental health crisis. So essentially the police officer is providing a safety assessment, ensures that the scene is safe, and then the civilian mental health professional or social worker is responding to help get that individual engaged in treatment. Now, obviously the purpose of this is to result in better outcomes for these individuals. And oftentimes you'll find that it leads to fewer repeat calls from these same folks. This is something similar to a neighbor of yours over in Greensboro. They have a behavioral health response team. So they actually have squads of officers paired with mental health clinicians, and they actually are responding out. And we're working with them as part of this project as well and evaluating that model. But there's a lot of examples of where this has been implemented successfully. Trying to identify what works best for Winston-Salem on a co-responder model, because there's a number of ways that this could take form. It could be a squad devoted to this, but it might also be, for example, a follow-up approach where officers are responding, they're identifying an event as having a mental health nexus, somebody that needs follow-up, and then afterwards or outside of that particular circumstance, mental health professionals following up. A different approach, alternative response, is non-critical call diversion. So really what this is about is freeing up officers' time by removing some of those non-critical calls from the officer's plate. So what this allows would be either officers more opportunity to focus where they're most needed, or officers more time to spend on calls where they are otherwise asked to sort of hurry along or move on to the next one if there's a lot of calls waiting. So it's non-critical call diversion. It could take a number of forms. It could be an in-person civilian response. So for example, down here in Tucson, Arizona, community service officers, and they're the ones primarily responding to burglaries or non-injury collisions, for example. Something that a police officer, something where a community member wants somebody to respond to take a report, but where the threat or the urgency is no longer there. It could also take the form of telephone response units. Sometimes you'll see departments doing that with light duty officers who are unable to actually respond in the field, but can still take reports over the phone. Online reporting mechanisms. And again, the point of this is to divert non-urgent calls from the police department so that they have opportunity with the remaining time to either spend more time on calls or spend more time with some proactive police work. And typical calls that you'd see fall into this category, non-urgent calls, minor traffic accidents, sometimes civil disputes, things of that nature. Now, this is sort of a pilot in the sense that this is something that is important, I think, for a lot of police departments to think through, but it's really challenging. So it's generally understood that mental health issues in the community are something problematic for police to deal with, but it's often really difficult to define the problem. And the reason for that is the systems that police departments use are often not built for that. So we can look back and we can understand, there's approximately 600,000 calls over the last 3 years the police department responded to. But those calls, the CAD system, the computer automated dispatch system, is really just meant to facilitate a call for service and getting an officer to the field. It's not meant for data collection, although we often repurpose it to do that. But understanding the actual extent of mental health issues and mental health crises that police are often asked to deal with is problematic, generally speaking, as these systems are built. So a retrospective look might be going through those call notes, going through the various unstructured fields within the CAD data to try and understand that, but it's certainly imperfect and it's very labor intensive. A potential pilot moving forward would be to engage with the CAD vendor, engage with the CAD system and see if there are additional opportunities to, on these events, create some sort of indicator whereby officers are saying, this was a mental health nexus, we needed a mental health professional or we needed follow-up. And in doing that, it doesn't provide an answer today, but what it would do is in the future provide opportunities to have a better understanding of how prevalent or how important would it be to have additional resources available to officers in responding to these sorts of calls. And one other piece, it's sort of I suppose an add-on opportunity would be something a little bit more basic, but that's inventorying service provider resources. So this is often something you'll hear from officers. They'd be more than happy to try and make a connection with a community member to appropriate resources, but they don't always have a full awareness of what resources are available in the community. So it's I don't want to say it's a simple problem to solve, but it's something that is solvable, right? So we can explore essentially mapping out what these service provider resources are, understanding when they're available, what the client criteria are, and actually creating that resource for members of the department to better facilitate connections that already are available within the Winston-Salem community. So the next step really, and I think the stage of where we are now is identifying what pilots or what approaches are most relevant or most important for Winston-Salem and the Winston-Salem Police Department. RTI's role in that, really we're agnostic to the direction that you all want to take. Our goal is just to support you in the path that you do take. So selecting these pilots, understanding how we want to push forward, but then also working with you to identify for whatever approaches you'd like to take, how do we understand what the impacts of those approaches are going to be? Where is it working? Where is it not working? What are unintended consequences? And actually developing a robust evaluation plan around that so that we can start building out this knowledge base and carrying that forward. Now, this current project runs through April 2022. So we're about 8-9 months left. But what we want to do is essentially develop a small scale pilot and corresponding evaluation to sort of lay the groundwork for what this could look like or where you're finding something that's promising. And ultimately in the future, continue working with you all to develop larger scale efforts or understand the full scale program evaluations. But I hope I didn't throw too much at you too quickly. That is the end of the slide, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. Members of the council or committee, is there anyone who has any questions about the materials that were presented or the concept regarding the next steps? Councilman Mundy.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor, and thank you for that presentation. I have a question on the existing models where there are clinicians who serve in this capacity. Are these clinicians part of a public safety, are they employed by a public safety department? Are they completely third party? How are they accessed? How are they trained? Help me understand when the clinicians come into the picture, how that works.
Sure. The shortest answer is yes to all of those things. It really varies depending on jurisdiction. So you do have some departments that actually will create the position and hire the clinicians to actually be a member of the police department, for example. In other jurisdictions, you'll see essentially relationships with existing service providers who may have more infrastructure within the community to provide that resource. And further, you may have hybrid approaches where that service provider is then actually housed inside the police department, at least, or some of the folks that work for that service provider are housed in the police department to respond at the same time as the team. So I don't know that there's one right answer, and I think there's examples of those across the country. I suppose it would come down to what ultimately is most effective or most prudent for Winston-Salem on how to approach that.
Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
Oh, Councilwoman Scipio.
Thank you very much. Great presentation on alternative responses. I'm concerned about our next step, which direction that we're saying is going to be our pilot. And I was curious that on that chart that summarizes the alternative response approaches, could we come up with a kind of hybrid that takes a bit of each of those approaches in our model? Because I don't see any one of them fitting all of our needs. So I was wondering if we're at the point of saying, we'll take a bit from hoots to home team, camp, lead, crisis intervention, a bit of that to come up with a model that we might want to have, and the co-responder model.
Thanks for the question, Councilmember Scipio. I think staff is actually looking for some feedback from you all as far as where you think the best pilot program would be. Staff is looking at a co-response initially, and that could still be using pieces of those alternative responses to build that pilot. So if you have any ideal alternative program that already exists and a piece that you really, really like and would like to see within our pilot program, please provide staff with that information. So when we come back with the specific pilot program, we'll know what you're looking for and we can build that in.
Thank you.
And Ms. Martin, to Councilmember Scipio's point, we're going to be building this thing out over the next 8 to 9 months. And it's my understanding it's probably going to stay in committee. So what I'd ask committee members and council members to do is be thinking about the types of pilots and responses we want to bring to the table for consideration. And when it comes back to the committee next month, we can make sure we continue to add, details to the plan so that we could, do what we need to do to support this concept. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this item? Councilmember Mundy for a second time.
Thank you. This is just a statement. I want to remind the general public, those listening, that although it's not ideal, that our police officers do engage in crisis intervention training. I know they do that through Forsyth Mental Health, and that is an effort to address some of these problems. Just for some of our folks who might think that we haven't made any effort to train our officers in recognizing mental health crises and how to deal with those. I just wanted to make that statement.
Excellent point, Councilmember Mundy. Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Yes, thank you, Chair Taylor. I want to thank the staff, and I want to thank Winston-Salem PD and all of its staff for us opening our minds to possibilities. I would be interested, and maybe I missed this in another meeting prior to, out of the cities that you've looked at in North Carolina, I think you said there was, maybe I'm mistaken, did you say 7? I would be interested to find out again, and maybe you have a matrix that shows what they do. And I would also like to see how much it costs, because at the end of the day, that's something the reality is we have to deal with. Even as much as we might want it, we got to figure out how to pay for it. And we don't have to do that now, but if we had some idea as to what it costs those cities that have this program, or any of them, what is their budget? How many officers or clinicians are involved? Maybe we watch too much TV. I don't watch enough anymore. But back in the day, we all saw on network TV that every police force, no matter where it was on television, they always seemed to have a clinician along with a pathologist or whatever. But there was always a clinician for behavioral issues. And I'm wondering, with our great men and women of Winston-Salem PD, do we have any officers and staff that are trained or degreed or whatever in clinical psychology, behavior, social work, any of those? Thank you.
We'll get that information, Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Adams. And as we move forward, let's just continue to wrap our mind around cost. This item is staying in committees just for informational purposes only, but we'll continue to build month after month until we get this program the way we want it and pay for it the way we like it. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard on this item? Dr. Kramer, members of the council committee? Anyone else wishes to be heard on this item? We'll hold this item in committee. Dr. Kramer, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. We look forward to seeing you in the subsequent months to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We'll move to item G2. Madam Clerk, if you please call the item.
Item G2, presentation of the Winston-Salem Police Department's initiatives to reduce violence with firearms. This item was continued from the June 14th, 2021 Public Safety Committee.
Thank you, ma'am. This item was continued from the last public safety meeting. I do know that Chief Thompson and Assistant Chief Weaver are on the call. So what I'd like to do is maybe, have you gentlemen or lady to introduce the item, and we'll move forward with discussion.
Yes, sir. Chief Weaver here. Good evening, Chair Taylor, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Council Members Burke, Larson, Mundy, Scipio, other city officials, as well as city administration. The City of Winston-Salem and the Winston-Salem Police Department continue to be committed to reducing gun violence across our city. We continue to expend significant efforts to address gun violence and to ensure a safer community for our residents, businesses, and visitors. As a demonstration of our commitment to community-oriented policing, which we've been involved in since 1989, we continue to forge relationships and partnerships that identify and support efforts to disrupt and curtail gun violence. Please keep in mind that gun violence came home to us on May 5th. We had the Laughlin Avenue incident. On May 10th, our District 1 office was attacked. And so because of those issues, because of the issues that are going on with the citizens out in our city, we are extremely concerned about gun violence. The Washington Post has advised that shootings are on the rise with a 23% increase in gun violence as compared to 2020 and a 40% increase from 2019. The overall number of shootings has been on the rise since 2014, and even though pandemic precautions were in effect in 2020, gun violence killed nearly 20,000 Americans, and that does not include suicides. And that's been more than any other year in the previous 2 decades. The COVID-19 pandemic has contributed to a surge in gun and ammunition sales, primarily due to the public confidence in law enforcement collapsing nationwide following the 2020 protest. With more stress, more anger, more guns and ammo, less personal restraint, all of that combines to equal more shootings. Gun violence is the apathetic national pandemic until it strikes us personally. Next slide, please. Just so you're aware of the different units that are investigating firearm offenses, our Criminal Investigations Division, of course, does those with the primary responsibility for a major crime solution, which includes investigations of homicides, robberies, burglaries, sexual assaults. Each district has a street crimes unit. The street crimes unit is responsible for concentrated enforcement of street level crime of all types throughout each district. Our gang unit is responsible for conducting investigations involving gangs, gang-related crimes and activity, and providing intelligence on gang members being investigated by law enforcement. And then, of course, our SWAT team is responsible for handling various high-risk enforcement incidents, such as armed barricaded subjects, hostage rescue, high-risk arrest, and dignitary protection. Next slide. So our Gun Crime Reduction Unit, or as we call them, G-Crew. G-Crew is assigned to the Patrol Division. They are responsible for the immediate response and investigation of gun crimes, which involve the discharging of firearms into a dwelling, a business, a vehicle, and or instance where an individual is injured by gunfire. They are able to apprehend violent offenders with a special weapons and tactics team or SWAT has not assumed the investigation or the apprehension, and they engage in proactive policing in areas where gun violence has repeatedly occurred to reduce additional gun crime incidents. Next slide. Of course, we have a partnership with the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, where we've been utilizing the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office saturation patrols, where they're giving us additional visibility in some of our areas that are experiencing gun crimes. They're partnered up with our G-Crew unit, the Gun Crime Reduction Unit, and that provides additional law enforcement presence in areas prevalent for gun violence. Next slide. And I'll turn this over to Lieutenant Amy Galden in reference to the Violent Firearm Investigations Team, or VFIT.
Lieutenant Galden. Are you with us?
Hello, sorry, we're having technical difficulties.
No worries.
All right, so our VFIT team is tasked with identifying the most prolific trigger flows in the community, and they work hand in hand with our state and local partners and federal, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the District Attorney's Office to ensure that those are identified as those violent offenders are prosecuted to the fullest extent based on the investigation. They're also tasked with being proactive in the community and using technology to connect their investigations. So we utilize NIBIN, which I'll discuss in a few moments, which compares evidence that is seized at the locations of the various shootings throughout our community. And ultimately, the overall goal of VFIT is to reduce crime and the fear of crime based on their activity and their investigations and the successful prosecutions that they're involved in. Next slide, please. This, again, was prepared for June. So you can see in 2020, we had 23 fatal shooting victims. And as of May 25th, there were 12 shooting or fatal shooting victims. And today, I can tell you that 16 that have died as a result of gunfire. And the rest of the statistics you can show in 2020, there's 180 approximate non-fatal shooting victims, and as of May 25th, 81. We had over 3,000 discharging firearms calls for the 2020 year, and 1,000, roughly just over 1,000 up to May. We had 847 crime guns recovered in 2020, and 359 again up to May. There's 183 crime guns linked in NIBIN in 2020 and 105 for 2021. And NIBIN leads based on the evidence that was entered into the system by both our sworn and non-sworn staff on the VFIT team. There was 1,288 in 2020 and approximately 329 in 2021 as of May 25th. Next slide, please. All right, this slide here is just a depiction of what our goal is as part of the VFIT team, and we follow the Crime Gun Intelligence Center model, which is supported by ATF as one of our partners. So basically, this shows that we established a dedicated investigative team that coordinates the effort. So we work hand in hand with G-Crew, SWAT, and our various other units that investigate gun crimes in the police department. We utilize NIBIN and E-Trace. There's a turnaround time frame of roughly 24 hours. We meet those standards almost, I'd say 95% of the time. There's certain criteria that may be an outlier. We have several agencies that use our NIBIN machine as well, and so we don't always have control of the time frame. We consistently collect all evidence, and that is a huge component of getting most success out of the NIBIN program, and forensic technology to drive the investigations and the prosecution. VFIT was created in 2019 and established, and since then the program has evolved, and the NIBIN program has really taken off. We actually have been designated from ATF as a model agency for other agencies in our region. So just as last week, for example, we had Charleston PD and Charleston County come to do a site visit to view our NIBIN and VFIT office, as well as be exposed to our policies and procedures and learn from us. So it's great to see that unit being used as a best practice for other agencies as well, just to give you kind of an idea of the work that they're doing. And also establishing and maintaining partnerships, both with internal and external stakeholders, has been critical to the NIBIN program and the VFIT work that they're doing. Next slide, please. And some of you may already be familiar with NIBIN, but just as an overview, it's our National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, where it correlates and connects possible leads to other crime scenes based on evidence seized at a particular scene. It also provides us with investigative leads in a timely manner. So NIBIN gives us information or kind of drives sometimes the investigation, or gives us leads to investigate that connects a series of incidents. So if we have a series of shootings and we enter the shell casings or firearms involved in those incidents, then we can connect those that are occurring at various parts throughout the city to whether it's a crime gun that's being used at multiple locations, or if it's a shell casing that allow us to determine that it's the same firearm being used. Next slide, please. Just an overview of our NIBIN statistics compared to our region as well as across the state of North Carolina. You can see the Winston-Salem PD had over 1,200 investigative leads during the time period listed of May 2020 to May 2021, which resulted or was based on 2,744 acquisitions. Acquisitions is just the evidence that is entered into the system. So there's basically 2,744 pieces of evidence entered into the system, which resulted resulted in a 44% lead results from lead acquisition. You can see with compared to the region, we exceed the region and we certainly exceed the state. And so that's definitely, again, attributed to the work and the turnaround time, the quick turnaround time, which is based on us having 2 part-time NIDA technicians that enter the shell casing for us and firearms, as well as a NIDA program administrator, our non-sworn staff as part of VFIT, as well as the investigation system do. Next slide, please. Another component of VFIT and CID that we're implementing very soon is ShotSpotter, which is funded by a 2019 Crime Gun Intelligence Center grant. So just to give you an overview of how ShotSpotter works, this is a very simplistic overview, but if there's a firearm fired at a location, there's multiple sensors that are installed throughout the 3 square mile coverage area that the city has selected based on data that supports the highest volume of discharge of firearms calls for service. So those sensors triangulate the sound, and then that is sent to what ShotSpotter deems an incident review center. That's human review that then reviews that alert and pinpoints it, and then sends that to our 911 communications, as well as officers in their car and on their mobile device. So the national average is 30 to 45 seconds that the officer gets that immediate access to that data of a ShotSpotter alert, and ShotSpotter guarantees will receive that alert within 60 seconds. So they're exceeding the national average, or I'm sorry, the national average is better than what they guarantee. But overall, it's pretty quick. And again, it's a 3 square mile area that we have coverage for in the city. Officers arrive and have the potential to engage the suspect or a greater potential to seize evidence that will help us in conjunction with the NIDA program. Next slide, please. Another component of our efforts is the Real-Time Crime Center, which we established a temporary center in January 2021. And it has really been a game changer for us in the way we do investigations. And we did that for a relatively low cost, just a small time, and with only 2 detectives, and have already seen great success with that. So we also received the 2020 Strategies and Policing Innovation Grant to build and design the large-scale real-time crime center, which you see on the right-hand side of your screen as a force multiplier. Our goal will be to add additional personnel and staffing to include non-sworn crime analysts, possibly a dispatcher, and additional detectives. So there's several case studies or success stories that we can share at any point in time if anyone is interested regarding the involvement of the Real-Time Crime Center. So for instance, we've had one which was a potential kidnapping that our Real-Time Crime Center was able to view, and prior to it being actually dispatched, they viewed it. The dispatch was given out to patrol officers. They were able to look at the cameras in that location and immediately confirm it was a domestic violence related kidnapping. They provided that information to officers, and who were able to then apprehend the suspect vehicle and recover the victim safely and unharmed within 2 minutes, or 2 miles and 5 minutes of the location roughly. So it has been a game changer for us and definitely enhanced our investigations. It's become something that I think most detectives and officers have relied upon to at least see. Right now, we're still building the program and our access to certain cameras throughout the city, and it's really utilizing existing camera infrastructure. We're not adding any additional cameras at this time, in partnership with the community that wish to work with us on this project. And the next slide is a video, if it will play, that is just an introduction to the Real-Time Crime Center.
Apologies, it doesn't seem to be playing.
Okay. Well, basically, this was just an overall view of Real-Time Crime Center. WSI had done a story where we had a 4-year-old shooting on New Hope Lane several months ago. And so just to give you another case example, in this case, there was a shooting of a 4-year-old. The Real-Time Crime Center was able to remotely access that video footage and provide that information regarding the suspect vehicle almost immediately to officers. So within 24 hours, they had the driver of the vehicle identified, who confessed to his involvement, and identified the actual shooter in the vehicle. And that shooter was actually arrested, I think it was within 7 days roughly. So again, something we couldn't have done without that technology in place. And many of the other cases that I would give you the same example, we would not have been able to accomplish that as quickly without that technology in place. So it's been very beneficial in that respect. Next slide, please. This is just an overview here of how the Real-Time Crime Center works in conjunction with the other units, just to give you an overview. We've already talked about VFIT, NIBIN, G-Crew, and ShotSpotter. The Camera Registry and Community Connect sharing program are part of the camera surveillance platform called PIECES, which are utilizing the Real-Time Crime Center. It has been very helpful to us. PIECES allows us to integrate that video feed from various different entities into the Real-Time Crime Center. The camera registry itself is just where citizens can elect to share their actual location of a camera. It's simply just a location. It's not sharing a live feed or anything like that. They register their camera, and then that way, if there's an incident in their neighborhood, we can go ahead and we see it on a map, and we're able to draw a circle around that and send an electronic request to those people who have their cameras registered. Then we send them an email. They still retain the right as to what to share, when to share it, and so forth. They get that, and then they can send their video in electronically. And it saves a lot of time. It really expedites our investigations. So that's the camera registry. The Community Connect sharing program is another component of PIECES, which allows us to partner with businesses throughout the community. They're able to purchase a core device, which again works in conjunction with PIECES, and it allows us to access their live feed. They determine which video cameras they want to share, whether it's internal, external, or both, and then it can also integrate with a panic button. So if a business, for example, elects to only share their external cameras, however, they want it to integrate with their panic button in case of a robbery or something like that, they can also do that. So they wouldn't necessarily share their internal cameras on a regular basis, but if they hit their panic button, then it would give us immediate access to those cameras. So the Community Connect sharing program, we're still marketing that component of it, but it does, it's growing, and we're seeing a lot of people interested in it and partnering with us in terms of having an opportunity to be a part of the Real-Time Crime Center for the police department. Next slide.
So under the leadership of Councilmember Burke, she has approached both the Public Safety Committee members as well as the other council members to discuss another proposal for doing a gun buyback initiative. And just to give you some history on our success with the gun buyback programs, in 2014, we did a gun buyback program where 488 total weapons were surrendered. In 2016, we had a safe surrender where we did not exchange cash for guns, and it wasn't anywhere as near successful because the people weren't receiving cash for it. And so we hope at this time that with the funding that has been secured, we will be able to do a gun buyback program later on this fall. Next slide, please. And so, Chair Taylor, this presentation was for information only. There's no action required by the Public Safety Committee. We're available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chief. Members of the council and committee, are there any questions on the violence reduction initiatives that were presented today for Assistant Chief Weaver or Lieutenant Galden that you wish to bring up at this time? Councilwoman Scipio.
Thank you for a good update. My question is, how do our police drones fit into our violence reduction, if at all?
They don't at this point in time. Primarily what we're utilizing our UAVs for is to document crime scenes and give us real-time data on incidents that may be occurring. But as far as the gun violence, we've not found an immediate use for them at this time. But as the technology keeps increasing, we're hoping that we will find an ability to do that as time goes on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? All right. So, okay. Councilwoman Burke.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I wanted to say thank you to Chief Weaver and to the entire Winston-Salem Police Department for all that you do and for this presentation and just updating us on the initiatives that are in place and on the way to help to reduce violent crimes and to help us with this problem, this mounting problem of guns and firearms. So thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Councilwoman Burke. I mean, as Chief Weaver mentioned, it's a national issue. Today, we just wanted to bring this item for your understanding. When I say your, I mean the council and those who might be watching this publication, just to show you that this local government and this police department, we're doing everything we can to provide you with safety and security, and we won't stop until we get it done. With that being said, members of the committee, council, we have completed the consent and general agenda items. Is there any other business that should be considered for the good of the order? Seeing no other business, that concludes our agenda. We will consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.